My name is Dr. Sathya. Today I am talking about intermittent fasting. A lot of patients ask me about intermittent fasting. There are a lot of doubts regarding to that one. So I will just explain to you what is intermittent fasting, how it works, what all different myths that's all not correct. So I will explain detailedly about that. So intermittent fasting is called time restricted eating. There are two states called feeding state and the fasting state. The body is designed to smoothly transition between the two different states. That is opposite states of the feeding state and the fasting state. In the feed state, our insulin is elevated and this signals our body to store excess calories in the fat cells in the presence of the hormone insulin. The burning of fat is halted while the body burns glucose from the last meals. If the faster state, the insulin will be always low, while the glucagon and the growth hormones, opposing hormones to insulin, are elevated. The body starts mobilizing the stored body fat from your fat cells and burning this fat for the energy instead of the glucose. The practical importance for this all, you can only burn the stored body fat while in the faster state, and you can only store more body fat while in the feeding state. Insulin resistance, unfortunately, over the time, we seem to be spending less and less of our time in the fasted state and more in the feeding state. As a result, our cells spend less and less time mobilizing and burning the stored body fat for energy, and the glucose burning pathways are overused. Eventually what happens, the insulin will be high all the time and the body avoids burning the stored body fat, relying mostly on glucose. Over the time, this chronic exposure to so much insulin also lead to a condition called insulin resistance, where the body secretes even more and more insulin in response to feeding state. The chronic insulin resistance is the cause of all the metabolic syndrome, or we call it as obesity, the abdominal fat storage, high triglycerides, low HDL or good cholesterol, and elevated glucose with eventual type 2 diabetes. 1 in 12 humans on the earth currently have full-blown type 2 diabetes, while 35% of the adults and 50% of the older adults have metabolic syndrome or condition called pre-diabetes. Someone with insulin resistance is burning predominantly glucose on the cellular level, and they rarely ever get the opportunity to burn any body fat. When these people run out of glucose from their last meal, instead of easily transitioning over the fasted state to burn fat, they become hungry and more glucose from the carbohydrate as their bodies and the cells have decreased capacity for mobilizing and burning fat for energy. Let's put this way. Why would a highly obese person ever be hungry? They have enough fat stores to last a very long time. The world record for fasting went to a 456 pound man who fasted for 382 days, consuming only water and vitamins and losing 276 pounds with no ill effects. But the average overweight person is used to be in the feed state, has very little practice in the faster state, and is continuously burning glucose rather than the fat at the cellular level. They have insulin resistance, which is both caused and also leads to chronically high insulin levels, which promotes fat storage and suppresses the fat metabolism for the adipose cells, that is the fat cells. They even have changes in the mitochondria. Mitochondria is called the powerhouse of the cell or tiny energy factories inside the cell. These mitochondria can burn either glucose or fat for fuel, and over time they will have a preference for one over the other. The sugar burners have increased the pathways in the mitochondria that burn glucose and decreased, or it is being down-regulated. Underused pathway for burning fat. So what happens to the overweight sugar burner who stops eating for a few hours as they run out of glucose for the last meal instead of scheming, transforming to the faster state and mobilizing and burning stored body fat? They become hungry and more glucose from carbohydrate. They will spend most of the day trapped in a cycle of eating very few hours, which spikes the glucose and then become hungry. When the blood glucose drops, a good analogy is that the tanker truck on the freeway filled with oil. If the tanker truck runs out of the gas, it stops moving, despite the fact that it has 10,000 gallons of potential fuel on the board. Why? Because it prefers to run on a refined gas and is incapable of burning oil for fuel. Now we will talk about fasting myths. There are many myths about fasting. One of the things is breakfast is the most important meal of the day. We have all been told to eat breakfast. Unfortunately, this is a terrible advice. When you first wake up in the morning, your insulin hormone level is quite low, and most people are just starting to enter the fasted state. 12 hours after eating the last meal of the previous day, the worst thing you could do is to eat food, spiking insulin and glucose and immediately shutting off fat burning. A much better choice would be push the first meal of the day out at least few hours, during which you can fully enter the fasted state and burn the stored body fat. The very worst would be the eat a high carbohydrate breakfast, spiking insulin and glucose at a high as possible, in addition to shutting off the fat burning for likely around 12 hours. This will drive as many calories as possible into the fast. This will drive many calories as possible into fat stores, as well as providing further reinforcement of the burning of the glucose rather than the fat. Also, high spikes of insulin and glucose always lead to the large drop of glucose in a few hours later, which triggers hunger. If you want to have hypoglycemia or low blood sugar and ravages hunger, just eat a breakfast of pure carbohydrate and then wait 2 to 3 hours to see how you feel. Interestingly, many properly fat adopted people are hungry in the morning and have no problem in skipping breakfast. This is appropriate, as throughout our evolution, humans have always been hunter-gatherers, and rather than eating a large breakfast, fasting in the morning, we would hunt and gather throughout the day, having a larger meal later in the day. I highly recommend mimicking this pattern by skipping breakfast and eating most of your calories later in the day, referred to as a reserve paper of calories, with none in the morning and most in the evening. Eat small, frequent meals. There has been plenty of worthless advice here. Second myth is, some people used to say, eat small, frequent meals. There has been plenty of worthless advice like this. We have been told to eat frequently to keep our metabolism going, and don't let your body enter a starvation mode. This is all exactly opposite to the real truth. In order to burn fat, you want to spend as much time in the fasted state as possible and get very efficient at living on stored body fat rather than the caloric intake from constantly eating. Similarly, we have been told to eat protein frequently throughout the day in order to build the muscles. This is also not evidence-based. Yes, you do want to eat an adequate amount of protein to build muscle, but eating it once a day is plenty. Third one is fasting lead to burning muscle instead of fat. Many people are concerned about this. If they are fasting, they will either stop making muscles or maybe even burn muscles. Is this true? Not at all. This is not true. If this were true, humans would not be here today in the world. In fact, the growth hormone is increased during the fasted states, both during sleep and after a period of fasting. The growth hormone might as well be called as fasting hormone. That is another name of the growth hormone. As it rises by as much as 2000% after 24 hours of fasting. The growth hormone is highly anabolic. That means building the muscle, and is used in combination with our testosterone hormone that is being used by bodybuilders who want to stimulously build as much as the muscle and burn as much as fat as possible. The growth hormone elevates in the fasting stage to help and preserve muscle in times of fasting, and this makes sense. In our hunter-gatherer ancestors, if fasting and going without food made you weaker and slower, you would never catch or find any food and you would die, and the human would become extinct. In fact, the opposite is the truth. While fasting, the muscles are preserved or can even grow if you are doing resistance training, highly recommended. Also, people experience increased levels of focus and alertness during fasting thanks to the release of epinephrine or norepinephrine. Earlier in our evolution, this increased the energy and alertness helped us to catch prey when necessary. Another myth is that your metabolism will slow down when you are fasting. This is completely false. A number of studies have been proven that fasting up to 72 hours, metabolism does not slow down at all, and in fact might speed up slightly thanks to the releases of the catecholamines, the epinephrine or adrenaline or norepinephrine and dopamine, and the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system is often considered as the fight or flight system, while the opposite is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is called the rest and digest system. It makes sense that our flight and the fight sympathetic nervous system would be activated during the daytime. When the hunter-gatherers humans are most active and in the faster state, they are looking for the food, followed by the parasympathetic, the rest and the digest mode in the evening after the eating. If you don't eat, I will get blood sugar hypoglycemia. Another myth. If I don't eat, I will get low blood sugar, a condition called hypoglycemia. Is it right? Studies have shown that healthy person who are no underlying medical condition, who are not taking any diabetic medication, can fast for extremely long period of time without suffering from any hypoglycemia. In fact, most all sensations of hypoglycemia or the low blood sugar, specifically in non-diabetics, results from eating a very high glycemic index carbohydrate food. That is a few hours prior, the blood sugar spikes, then the insulin spikes, then the sugar drops rapidly. However, if you are a diabetic, especially if you are any diabetic medication, you are definitely need to check your doctor before starting the fasting protocol. Some diabetic medication can lead to severe hypoglycemia if you fast. Mostly insulin and sulfonylurea drug like glipizide, glimepiride and glyburide. Be sure to check with your doctor prior to start a fasting protocol if you have any medical problems or diabetes or otherwise any other medical condition. Next one is how to fast intermittently. That means how we do intermittent fasting. There are a number of ways to actually perform intermittent fasting. But the easiest and the most popular varieties involving taking advantage of your natural overnight fast by skipping the breakfast and pushing the first meal of the day forward a number of hours. Once you have passed the 12-hour mark from dinner, the night before you are truly in a fasted state and you begin to rely on the stored body fat for fuel. The longer you stay in the fasted state, the more metabolic practice you will get at the burning stored body fat and the deeper your fat adaptation will get. In fact, if you can maintain this intermittent fast for 20 to 24 hours, you will achieve a very high rate of lipolysis, breakdown of the stored fat, body fat into free fatty acids available for the burning in the cells, and also the fat oxidation, the burning of fat in the mitochondria. When you first start out with the intermittent fasting, you can have quite a bit of hunger and low energy and other symptoms. In this case, I recommend starting out with baby steps by just pushing your breakfast out an hour and 2 at first, then slowly increasing the fasting intervals. As the time goes on by and you become more fat adapted and it is easier and easier to fast. This is identical to exercise in those who are sedentary. It is painful and extremely difficult to do this thing at the first, and then once you are adapted, it gets easy and even enjoyable. Thank you.